Hi, guys. We have a program called Beyond Betrayal, and in that we teach people how to help people who feel cheated by life, others, or God. But also part of that is not just learning how to process the betrayals that we've experienced. We also want to help people to learn how to develop winning relationships. And in this broadcast, we're going to be talking about three key pivot points to keep your relationships moving in a healthy direction. And I'm convinced that these are essential to really have healthy relationships. And when we begin to dissect our relationships that go off track, that we can almost always trace it back to one of these three key pivot points. And so that's what we're going to do, and we're going to be right back. There she is. Karen Johnson, how are you doing?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
Good. Well, I've been better. I'm just I've been trying to get past this flu bug,
Mm,
and it has been relentless. My poor wife, she is in a lot worse shape than I am right now.
bummer.
But I
Yeah.
figured that I'm not going to go ahead and yield to it. Although my brain has been completely crazy today. So who knows what will happen in this broadcast.
We'll have low expectations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate. Maybe I should be sick for every broadcast, and that way people can have low expectations always.
Oh, we always do, even if you're not sick.
Yeah, thank you. So, I'm. This is not a commercial, but I'm enjoying my Kirkland sparkling water here, and trying
Yeah,
to stay hydrated. And so
important.
that's what I got going on there. So how about you? Things been going okay?
Yeah, we're on the tail end of it ourselves. Mostly, I think we've got a cold, not the flu, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I
we've
don't
all
know if
been.
it's the flu or a cold. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I'm just sick of it. So,
Yeah.
so well, hey, we were talking a little bit behind the scenes about these three key pivot points, and so let's just go ahead and we'll jump in and begin to dissect these, and hopefully all the tech stuff is going to work here. So far, so good. So we have this. I created this ebook called "Oops, what happened to you?" There you are. So,
My alarm was going off.
okay, I created this ebook called Five Laws of Winning Relationships, and one of the laws of winning relationships is practicing these pivot points. But I believe, here's what I believe: is I believe that you can have a winning relationships with anyone. Now, that seems like it just is counterintuitive because we think, well, what about these people that are narcissists? Or what about people who are controllers? Or what about people who are abusers? Or what about this? Or what about that?
Hmm.
And I don't believe that you can have an ideal relationship with anyone. But
Yeah.
I do believe that you can have a healthy relationship with anyone. And what that means is sometimes you have to love them from a distance, or sometimes uh, a quarantine is necessary. And if you've been around me for any amount of time, when we're talking about relationships and we're talking about problematic relationships, particularly with people who are unrepentant, I always say the
Hmm.
best place for a dangerous dog is behind a high fence. And
Yeah.
then if you get bit because you stuck your hand in the cage, and that's your problem. So, but um, but we're trying to, um, I guess maybe equip people with the tools and resources that they need to have a healthy relationship with anybody. You know, so let's go back to our slides here for a moment. So the 5 laws are pretty simple. One is to adopt the right goal. 2 is to understand the 2 main paths that everybody travels down in relationship. 3 is to recognize the 3 key pivot points, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this broadcast. 4 is the 4 harmful reactions. We'll touch on that a little bit today too. And number 5 is the 5 life-giving practices. So here's the one goal that we need to adopt, and that one goal is the goal of health. People are always shooting for the wrong goal in relationships. And the wrong goal, the absolute wrong goal to have in a relationship is happiness. Because then we begin to evaluate everything that's going on in the relationship or the other person, or whether or not they're making me happy.
Yeah.
But but what we need to do is that we need to think in terms of that. Am I responding to this person in a healthy way? You know, and so why do you think it's so tempting for people to go for the goal of happiness? What do you
Well,
think?
I think probably because people want to feel good,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's that's kind of the more fun and maybe less responsible way of going approaching things. And um, also, it's kind of a part of our American dream, the pursuit of happiness.
yeah. Well, you know, and I think that we've been conditioned a lot in the media and through
Hmm.
movies of kind of like this, you know, or even fairy tales of living happily
Yeah.
ever after. And so it's we've bought into that, and it's easy to get confused about that. So um, there are 2 main paths that people take in every relationship. Your relationships, whether it be with your kids or your husband, my relationships, whether it be with my kids, my husband, my friends, my
You
wife.
don't have a husband.
Yeah, yeah. It's a different broadcast. So for a different channel.
Mhm.
So, but with respect to my wife, so or and we're coming up. We're closing in on 50 years
Yeah.
of marriage, and so that we'll be celebrating our anniversary here in May, and so we're excited about that.
Yeah.
But but every relationship is on one of 2 paths, and one is the way of response, which brings health to our relationships. And there you can see it. Is that everybody starts off. By the way, if you start off on this flow chart over where the little red heart is on the left hand side, is that everybody starts off full of hope and love and feeling good about what's going on, and then some disappointment happens in the relationship. Is that when if you're going to be if you're going to stay in the healthy zone in your relationship, we have to learn how to respond when we have been hurt rather
Hmm.
than react. And it's that way of reactivity that leads us into heartbreak, and the way of reactivity. And I've been working with couples for you know probably almost 50 years, and coaching them and counseling them. And it's the way of reactivity is always about blame. Who's at
Mm-hmm.
fault and who did what to whom, and if only he would change, and if only she would change, and back and forth and back and forth, and they get into this negative communication cycle, and then they get stuck in this cycle of dysfunction. And we're going to be looking at that a little bit more as we go along here. So, but right now, it doesn't matter who you are or what has happened, is that how you do relationships is based on one of these two models, these two paths. You either, when you're hurt, you appropriately grieve and forgive. And we'll be talking about grief and forgiveness as we go on in our broadcasts, because people are really confused about that, particularly forgiveness. But when you've been hurt, and if you are responding in a healthy way, you will grieve and forgive.
Mm-hmm.
You will communicate in a loving way. You'll practice some power listening, and you'll bring healthy building blocks into the relationship. And you'll stay on that course. And the good news is that you don't need the cooperation of anybody else, your partner or whoever else, your friends or whatever, for you to make the commitment to health in the relationship. And
Yeah.
so that's what we want to take a look at. So, what are your thoughts about that? Anything that you'd like to comment on with respect to that, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, both people are working towards a healthy relationship,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, you can only take care of what you can do, and
Yeah,
you're responsible for your part in it.
yeah.
So, yeah.
It's really what you're doing, what you bring to the table. And like I said, even if you're dealing with an unhealthy person, apparently your alarm went off again or something.
Yeah.
So that even when you're dealing with an unhealthy person, that you can respond to them in healthy ways.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's talk about these three key pivot points, and that's right there in the middle of the two. This really determines whether or not your relationship is going to become healthy or stay healthy. And those three key pivot points are how well you manage disappointment, solving for X, and setting, and maintaining redemptive boundaries. So we're going to be looking at each one of these here. One is managing disappointments. So reacting to hurt and disappointment will send me down the path to heartbreak, but responding is the way to health. Solving for X, everything changes when I change. This is how I turn things around and end the cycle of dysfunction. And redemptive boundaries. These three key pivot points are what are essential for us to be mindful about these when it comes to conducting our relationships. So let's talk about managing disappointments for a moment. This is the first pivot point, is that nobody starts off a relationship expecting things to get complicated, but every relationship is going to get complicated. There's going to be hurts and there's going to be problems that come into the relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
when I react to that hurt, then it's going to take me down the path to heartbreak. But when I respond to that hurt, it's going to lead me along the way to health. And so it's important to remember that it all starts with, how am I responding to the hurt you've brought to me. This is a real trap, by the way. And I'll tell you why it's a trap is that a lot of times when people have been hurt by another person that they're in a relationship with, then they develop this posture of being the wounded victim.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, it's not just being the wounded victim, but it's kind of about like being the defiant victim, you know. And both of those mentalities are unhealthy, because what you're still relating to people from the stance of victimization, rather than saying, I'm going to be healthy in my life, and I'm not going to let what you've done determine whether or not I make healthy and good choices for myself. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
but let's go on and talk a little bit more about these pivot points. This idea of managing disappointments there, that's where it all starts. Something happens in the relationship that you don't like, you don't want, and you have a choice. And right then, in how you respond to that is going to take you down the way of reaction, or it's going to take you along the way of response and on the road to health. So, but then the next key pivot point is this idea of solving for X. When I'm being reactive, so when I blame you, and you, quite frankly, might bear the lion's share of the fault for the problem in the relationship. But when I'm being reactive to you, then I'm bringing into the relationship an unhealthy dynamic myself.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it took me to, really begin to see this in my own marriage. I've counseled so many couples where they just get stuck in that because they want to, they don't, there's something within us where we do not want to step away from blame. We want to win the case, and we want the other person to say, oh yeah, you're right. And there are times when that really happens, when they own their stuff, but there are also plenty of times when they don't.
Yeah.
So excuse me, I'll try to mute myself next
Well,
time I do that.
and when you react, then you just end up in this cycle back and forth. You react to what they say, they react to what you say,
Yeah,
and it just kind of keeps going back and forth, back and forth.
yeah, that's for sure. So and the only way out of that is to solve for X. Now, the whole idea behind solving for X is just simply this, is that everything changes when I change.
Mm-hmm.
You see, and that's when you reclaim your power. Because if you stop and think about the blame thing, what blame does is it leaves us in that stance of victimization, and it leaves us powerless. And unless and until you 100% take responsibility for your contribution to the problem, and you acknowledge that, that I can't move on. But by solving for X and say, okay, I'm going to change. I'm not going to be reactive with you. That instead, I'm going to pursue and maybe here's the key question is that what is the next healthy response that I need to take in dealing with this person? Raising children. you're in that. You're
I'm
in
in the
that.
teens.
I know.
They're putting the teen in parenting.
Yeah. So that. And and I have to laugh, and it's not, and I'm not laughing with you. I'm laughing at you, because we've gone through that, raising 3 kids ourselves and going through the teenage years with all 3 of them, and so on and so forth. And now it's your turn to be raising the teens, you know. And teenagers are masters at keeping keeping the other person off balance.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, at least they're masters at something, right?
Yeah, exactly. you know, and it's easy to get frustrated as a parent, and that but the key is that, okay, instead of letting my frustration get the best of me on this, is that what is the next healthy response that I need to take in dealing with this person?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Timeout is still a great thing when you're working with teenagers too.
Yeah.
Like you need a little break sometimes so that you don't lose your mind or allow them to continue down the path. And a lot of times for us, just
Yeah.
having a little bit of time away from each other is a reset.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. That's good when that works.
Yeah.
But then when it doesn't work, that we have to ask ourselves, okay, what's the next healthy response
Yeah.
I'm going to take? So the whole thing is solving for X. Instead of saying, okay, your kids have to comply, or your mate has to comply, or your friends have to comply, or whatever else, you're waiting for them to comply, is that you just say, okay, what is the next right thing for me to do in this relationship? And that doesn't mean that you're all codependent, or that you are pursuing unhealthy means of relating. It just means I got to think about this and figure out what's the next thing. And there always is. There is always the next right thing to do. So,
Yeah.
There's a passage of scripture. I'm not only a life coach, but also I am a pastor. I've been doing that for a long time. And there's a passage of scripture that really opened up my thinking on this. It says, do not be overcome by evil. So, the bad that someone does to you, but overcome evil with good. Now, most of the time we end up butting heads with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what reactivity is all about. Reactivity is an attempt to overcome evil with evil. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you.
Yeah.
And it's the old eye for the eye type of thing. But the way that there's a way out of this cycle of dysfunction, and I want to just walk you through this real quick, because understanding this concept of the cycle of dysfunction and how to break it really opened things up for me in thinking about this. So, in any time your relationship is caught in an unhealthy place, is that your partner, we're going to give them the letter A, your partner brings their offense into the relationship, or your teenagers, or your friends, or whoever it is, they bring their offense. They said or did something that hurt or disappointed you. But it's your reaction that fuels the cycle, that keeps things just going round and round and round. And it's the fuel that gives life to this dysfunction. Or excuse me, the fuel that gives life to this is dysfunction. What they did was dysfunctional, but then how you react is dysfunctional. Now, there are two faces of reactivity, and this is subtle, but we have to learn to think about this, is that reactivity can be unpleasant. We see that all the time. That's easy to detect. We know what that looks like. Things get ugly, then I get ugly, tempers flare, words are exchanged, doors are slammed, or worse, And so everything gets, there's a lot of conflict and tension and things like that. And so when they bring their hurt, we can then oftentimes bring this aggressive reactivity to the scene. But there's also a completely dysfunctional version of reactivity that's pleasant. And one is that we begin playing the role of peacekeeper, or we act in codependent ways. So what's the difference? What's the difference between a peacekeeper and a peacemaker? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I think like a peacekeeper would just be like trying. They're not necessarily interested in solving the problem. They're just interested in placating the other person.
Yeah, yeah,
Whereas a peacemaker works to find solutions.
yeah. And works to find peacemakers really are about valuing health in the relationship.
Hmm.
Peacekeepers are about protecting dysfunction or preserving dysfunction. And so we don't deal with the person's alcoholism. We don't deal with their anger. We don't deal with their abusive language. And so we just kind of placate that,
Yeah.
And so learning how to talk about those things or even work through those things is really what's essential for peacemaking. So, but people, and we do ourselves and our relationships a disservice when we're pleasant and we don't talk about the unpleasant things that need to be talked about. And so that this is what the cycle of a dysfunction looks like. There's an aggressive side to it, and then there's the passive side, or the passive aggressive side to it. But it never does really bring health to the relationship. So the only way to break the cycle of dysfunction is decide from your side of the relationship that I'm going to pursue health in this relationship no matter what.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice if you could have the conversation. And I'm going to be talking about ways to have conversations with your partner and others, to have difficult conversations with others. But we got to just do these things one at a time. But it'd be nice if you could have those types of conversations where there be a meeting of the minds and so on and so forth. But sometimes you got people that insist on doing things insist on being unhealthy in the relationship. You say, okay, you can do that, but I'm going to pursue health. And that means that there may be some tough choices that you have to make in order to do that. So the cycle of dysfunction is really the key to that is solving for X, solving for my side of the relationship, and making 100% commitment to health, even if you're not going to do that on your side of the relationship. And so that's how we can move things forward. So there are 3 key pivot points. We talked about managing disappointments, solving for X, and redemptive boundaries. That's what I want to look at next. And I'm just going to touch on that very briefly, and we'll come back to that on a later broadcast. But redemptive boundaries are really all about conserving health. So once you've moved your relationship up on this way of response, so whenever disappointments happen in the relationship, you're learning how to respond to those. You grieve and you appropriately forgive, and you learn how to communicate and how to do power listening and bring in more building blocks. When craziness starts to kind of rear its ugly head again, which it will, it always does, is that you have to set redemptive boundaries. And one of the easiest ways for me to think about a boundary is that I in a relationship, I get what I tolerate.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I tolerate abuse, I get abuse. When I tolerate alcoholism, I get alcoholism. When I tolerate cheating, I get cheating. When I tolerate lies and deception, that's what I get. When I tolerate, verbal put downs, and so it's not really about trying to control the other person's behavior. It's about saying, here's what I'm going to tolerate in our relationship. So thoughts about boundaries?
Yeah, well, I like the whole I get what I tolerate, but nobody's perfect, so you're going to have to figure out what is it that you're willing to tolerate. Obviously not abuse, but like
Mm-hmm.
socks on the floor, that might be something you're just like, hey, I'm going to tolerate this because it's
Yeah.
not worth it.
Yeah.
uh, I think you could, the whole I get what I tolerate, you can kind of go a little too far with that too and just be like, I'm tolerating nothing.
Yeah. Well, and that's not that's not, if yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, nobody's perfect, but if that's your kind of your attitude in a relationship, I'm not saying your attitude, but I'm saying if that's a
Mhm.
person's attitude in the relationship, then they have a problem.
Yeah,
Because they have an unrealistic expectation of
sure.
how relationships are going to go. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but with the boundary thing, is that what we have is that once we move into this healthy zone in our um, doing relationships, then the way we conserve that is by setting boundaries. And there are certain non-negotiables. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
there are
I
certain
actually,
huh?
I actually went to a seminar when I was, before I met Matt, and it was like the non-negotiables of dating,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought really was very helpful for me. And so you kind of just come up with like the things that you're not willing to compromise on. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you're a Christian, then being equally yoked. So having another Christian is going to be one of those things that needs to be in your non negotiables.
Yeah.
And, and so that was really helpful to me to kind of like, they said, write them out, write out what it is that you're not
Mm-hmm.
willing
Hmm.
to
And
like,
I think that it's worthwhile to
hmm
have a conversation about those things too, you
yeah,
know, and
yeah,
work through those things together.
hmm
So um, there are these three key pivot points just to kind of bring this thing to an end, and that's
hmm
managing disappointments. We have to learn how to respond rather than react. Solving for X. So, in other words, when we are in that crazy space, instead of waiting for the other person to invest in health, I'm going to invest in health and ask the question, what's the next healthy thing for me to do right now
yeah,
in this relationship? And we need to set redemptive boundaries. So we have this ebook that you can download. It's 5 Laws of Winning Relationships. And the whole idea is that good relationships don't happen by accident, that they really are part of a deliberate and intentional quest in our lives. And we can achieve that. I really do believe that you can have a healthy relationship in any circumstance. And it's just a matter of making those wise choices for yourself. Um, Before we wrap up, anything that you'd like to say?
hmm. Well, nothing really is coming to mind right off the bat, but
Hmm. Yeah,
uh,
that's good. Well, I'm,
hmm
because I'm done myself. So, so hey, stick around. I'm going to have a chance to talk with you in just a minute. But in the meantime, what I want to do is I want to remind folks that of the where they can find the link to the ebook there. It's also in the description of this broadcast, and it's at 5laws.phonesites.com. It's completely free, gives you an idea of how to begin to develop healthier relationships. And we're just going to continue to work through this in our Beyond Betrayal program, helping people to learn how to process betrayal and hurts, but also helping them to understand how to create winning relationships. And so that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.